All right, guys. So I recently was reading an article on the Cincinnati Bengals kind of having an internal debate about what they want to do with their current stadium that probably I would say is in the bottom third of NFL stadiums right now in the league. And I think this is something that's kind of being debated about MLB stadiums and NFL ones. It's the stadiums that were built in the 90s. What do you do with these things as they become more and more obsolete? Is the answer a $350 million renovation like we've seen with some of them? How about the Rogers Center? Or is the answer just scrapping it and biting the bullet and building the brand new $1.2 billion retractable roof stadium where you could host more events, and theoretically it could last you probably until 2060 or 2065. It's kind of a debate going on right now. I'm going to go through a few different stadiums and give my opinion. What should they do? Should they renovate them and throw $250, maybe $300 million at a renovation, salvage the stadium, or should they scrap it? Say instead of, throwing $300 million at a renovation to where we're probably going to end up having to build a new stadium in 15 or 20 years anyways, let's just bite the bullet, build the new stadium now. Now, I know it's not that simple. I know there's a lot of factors that come into play. Can they get the money? But I just think it's an interesting idea. And you can see this is what the Bengals are saying about their current stadium. Within 5-6 years, you will have been eclipsed by every other NFL stadium, and the fans are not going to enjoy the experience. Building a new stadium isn't completely out of the question for the commissioners either. They asked Tuesday for the master plan to include options for a new stadium as well as renovations to the current one. And then we do have some pretty in-depth renovation proposals to the Cincinnati Bengals current stadium, which I believe is called Paycor Stadium. It used to be called Paul Brown, but the name recently changed, and I do think, I'll give my opinion on Paycor, I think that it can be salvaged. It's important to understand the market size. Cincinnati is not a major market. The idea of footing a $1.2, $1.3 billion bill on a new stadium when your current stadium is only 23 years old seems a little crazy, but I understand why Cincinnati is angry. They do not have a good stadium. They do have a really good team with Joe Burrow, who I'm sure, they hope he's going to be their franchise quarterback for the next 10, 15 years. They're constantly going to be in the playoffs. This stadium is going to get significant use. Cincinnati has such an amazing color scheme. I think what they should do in one of the end zones, I would just build like a jungle type vibe or theme, make it really fun seats for, fans. And that's kind of what I would do. Now, these renovations, they're basically stripping out certain seating and putting in a bunch of bars. You can see it looks like, they've got some trees. Maybe that's the whole jungle thing they're going with. I don't really understand putting trees behind the scoreboard. It's just kind of a weird thing. I don't know. Maybe it's just not, that is what it is. And then there you can see all of the seating. This stadium is known for having like a giant escalator on the one side. I believe in these renovations, they would take it out and put in kind of a few more sections of standing room areas for the fans. So a lot of these renovations, not really anything happening to the upper deck, nothing crazy, just a bunch of standing room areas, more suites, more social sections. That's kind of what we're seeing. So I do think Cincinnati, based on their current situation, there is room to renovate that stadium and probably spend, I would say, around $300 million in probably a 2-year renovation, and it'll give you an extension of like maybe 12 years on the stadium's life, but they do need a renovation. That is not a good stadium. I think I ranked that 26 out of 30, and I'll be honest, I was a little bit harsh on it. Maybe I should have moved it up a little bit, but still, it's not very good. The next one, what should the Cleveland Browns do? So this is a big question. I know, or at least I think, the Browns want a roof. And if they actually want a retractable roof or like one of these fixed roofs that lets in natural light, you got to get a new stadium. It's just not going to work. You're going to spend too much money. At this point, the Browns opening Cleveland Browns Stadium in 1999, by the way, it's not called First Energy anymore. I don't know what happened to First Energy, that company. They had some fraud or something. They got sued, so they're not on the name. And it is back to Cleveland Browns Stadium. But this stadium did undergo a renovation back in 2014. Both end zones, they chopped off a lot of the seats. They made it more futuristic. It looks really good, I think. But this is a very bland stadium overall. And I think if they do want a roof on it, you're better off just building a new one. It would cost a lot of money for sure. But trying to put a roof on this thing, to me, it would just be too difficult. In general, trying to put a roof on an open-air stadium, it's really hard anyways, and it costs a ton of money. Next, this is Bank of America Stadium, so this also opened in the mid-90s, maybe a little bit older. I don't see any way you can salvage this. It is just so ugly. It is just two walls of seats. And I know they were talking about maybe putting a roof on it, but I'm guessing, Charlotte, it's a very solid city. This stadium, does it still host the ACC championship? I'm not sure, but there's no salvaging this. You're not going to have a renovation that saves this. To me, if you wanted to renovate it, without adding a roof, maybe you could do it and try and do something with the upper deck. I mean, I don't know. Charlotte is a good city. You would want a roof on the stadium to be able to host different events, and I would say there's really no saving it. So my actual prediction on the situation with the Panthers, they're probably going to start designing a new stadium, and I would say they could be in the running for the NFL's next super stadium in 2029 or 2030 if dialogue actually starts. We really haven't seen much dialogue with Carolina getting a new stadium. I know there were a few renderings out there about a retractable roof futuristic stadium, but overall, you're not saving this thing. It is completely out of date, and they're going to need a new stadium at some point. I believe that opened in 96. Next, it is American Family Field, so the Brewers are already asking for around $300 million for a new renovation of American Family Field. And yeah, this stadium, the build of it, it's one of those retractable roofs. It is a completely flawed design with the scoreboard in center field right above the completely vertical batter's eye. So the design of it is just completely flawed. The renovation that I would do, I would take the scoreboard, I would move it either to left center or right center, and I would completely redo the batter's eye area. I would also redo the seating in left. It kind of feels like it's cheap and it's levitating. I understand the bullpens are right under there, but that is something you would have to do. It's hard to place the scoreboard when you have these retractable roof stadiums because it all has to be connected, where it can't just be open air, which is really annoying. And I know this is one of the retractable roofs that is open roughly 50% of the time, so that's a good thing. There's no way Milwaukee would foot the bill for a new stadium. This thing's just not even close to being old enough. But they are trying to get around a $300 million renovation for that. And, I think that's probably what should happen. It's just not old enough. It is salvageable. If you make a few moves, it can be okay. Next, it's Chase Field. I don't think you're saving Chase Field. So Chase Field has the exact same, Chase Field has multiple issues. One of the issues is the design flaw of the scoreboard in center field right above the batter's eye. And the other big design flaw with this one, it is the upper deck seating. I guess you can try and fix that. I know they were talking about maybe a major renovation. They're also talking about moving possibly to a different part in Arizona and building a new stadium. That would be way down the line. But with Chase Field, do you really want to dump $300 million into it? I don't think so. You would have to completely redesign the upper deck. And again, I just think it's flawed. There has to be a better way to do the center field situation than what currently is there, where you've got that yellow line and then everything over that yellow line is a home run. It's just a horrible design. And I don't think Chase Field is salvageable, but maybe they'll try and do a renovation, or maybe they'll just move for good and go to a different place, maybe like Scottsdale they were talking about there. How about this one? Oriole Park at Camden Yards. So I did want to discuss Camden Yards because it opened the exact same time as Progressive Field and as Coors Field, and we saw both Progressive Field and Coors Field get massive upper decks renovations. One of them was botched. Progressive Field was not done well, but there is an idea and there is an actual rendering of a potential upper deck renovation for Coors Field. I would really say no to this. I understand Baltimore has not had good attendance recently, but if you look at those Oriole teams back in 2013, 2014, when they were in the playoffs, they drew upwards of 30,000 most nights. They were selling out weekend games. I really don't think now, basically out of the rebuild, now is the time for Baltimore to really be cutting down on their upper deck seating. They're going to get more fans. What I will say is there is kind of a lower bowl extension seating that is like right beyond the right field fence or the right field foul pole that I think looks really bad. It's just too much of extended seating. I think they're going to chop some of that off if they were actually going to do a renovation, and they would put maybe a bar there. You can see that kind of what it is. That's the overall renovation design. That's part of it. There's like a bottom bowl. They would chop some of those seats off, and it looks like they'd put a restaurant there, but then they'd also chop seats off of the upper deck, which I don't agree with them doing, but that is an idea for Oriole Park at Camden Yards. Next, it is Guaranteed Rate Field. This opened in the 90s. Yeah, this thing's not, you're not saving this thing. This thing needs Jesus. I mean, it's not going to happen, but I don't think they're going to have any plans for a new stadium anytime soon. They're just going to have to live with it. Is there any renovations you can do? I just think it's the way it's designed, it's just not a good, I mean, you have all that, you have that wall out there that's blocking the entire stadium in. I don't know, man. It is not a good stadium. It is there's just nothing special about it. And then this is kind of the other major one, TIAA Bank Field. And there's been a lot of discussions around what Jacksonville should do. They're talking about possibly putting a roof on it, maybe a $500 million renovation. I don't think you're saving this, man. So this stadium reminds me of Highmark Stadium in Buffalo. And Buffalo, they're not renovating their stadium. They're just getting a new one. So I think TIAA, whatever it's called, TIAA, they really got to change that name, man. I can't do it. But I think they need a new stadium. I know the world's, biggest cocktail party is played here between Georgia and Alabama, or between Georgia and Florida. But it's just not big enough for an NFL facility, in my opinion. It has a very small upper deck on both sides. It just reminds me of Highmark Stadium. Let's not disrespect it completely. They do have a pool, so that is a great feature of that. And then in Power Field at Mile High, this is another one. What should they do? Built kind of in that same era. Should they renovate it? Should they get a new stadium? The Denver Broncos put out a survey to season ticket holders asking, would they want a new stadium? What type of features would you want? And I think Denver's in a very unique spot because that is a major city and they could greatly benefit from a retractable roof. But I'll be honest, I like Empower Field. I think it's a cool upper deck design. It fits the Panthers. I like the dark blue seating. I guess you can say it's bland, and yes, it's not modern. If you got a new stadium, it would be retractable roof. It would have a better kind of seating and all that, and more drink rails and things like that. But I like this stadium. I know I'm probably slightly in the minority. A lot of people think it's bland. I just like the way the upper deck is designed. I like how the one end zone is basically completely open. And then this final one, NRG. I just think NRG Stadium sucks. I don't like it. I think it's a horrible design. It kind of has those 4 pillars in the corner. That's probably the main reason why I think it's really ugly. I know I'm in the minority. I understand it hosts a lot of big events. It just hosted the Final Four. It hosts Super Bowls sometimes. But I think it's a very ugly stadium. I think it's deeply flawed. It's going to stay, I'm sure. I believe it opened in 2006. But I don't know when it opened, but could you imagine if this stadium opened in 2006 and then AT&T Stadium opens like 3 years later, how much better AT&T looks? I'm not trying to pick on NRG, but my goodness. But guys, those are just some stadiums currently debating. Do we renovate? Do we spend the $1.3 billion or whatever it is on a new stadium? It's a big debate going on in the stadiums that were built in the 90s or early 2000s. What do you do? And that's going to something that, and that is something that we will have to see. And that is something I just kind of wanted to talk about with a few different candidates for renovation or possibly getting a new stadium. Either way, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.